Steel Plaza. Please stand clear of the doors.
This is The Vessel. This is the show where we talk about everything that goes bump in the night. A little bit of the esoteric, a little bit of the night sky, a little bit of the extraterrestrials, a little bit of everything that's a little bit left of the dial, or a lot of it left of the dial. My name's Adam, and joining us today is Gabriella Vaughn, and she's going to tell us some of her experiences in some of these darker corners of the mind. Are extraterrestrials there? What happens when we die? And is there more to this dimension that we actually know that exists? Gabriella, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, the background, and how this all began?
Sure. So I originally am from Europe. My mother is from Italy. My father is Serbian and Turkish. I was born in Serbia, but I pretty much lived and traveled with my mother. So we lived in Germany, in Hamburg and Munich, and then Italy for a little bit. And then when I was 4 or 5 years old, we moved back to Serbia, and I pretty much grew up there until I was 13 years old.
Those are a lot of places that were well known for what we know today as witchcraft. Things originated, and a lot of people know the term today, gyp. Like, oh, he gypped me or she gypped me. That comes from the term gypsy. There was a lot of traveling caravans back then, and the term gyp means that someone had ripped you off, and it's a derogatory term.
It is.
For
my grandfather was a gypsy, and his it's in Europe. It's almost kind of considered when people say gypsy. It's not just like a lifestyle, but they're put in a categories if they're like a different race. You know.
A lot of right. A lot of people say England for the English and things like that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nationalism overseas. So, and a lot of the history, a lot of the historical artifacts that people study today of extraterrestrials come from those countries, and there's a gravitas towards them, to this people, to carry the stories on to this day. Now, you yourself, even as from the time of a young girl, have experienced these phenomenon of extraterrestrials. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So I was 3 years old at the time, and I remember this memory so vividly. I was writing in a little notebook, and I would write on different pieces of paper on the walls of our house, and I was writing what people like to call now a light language, and I remember my mother asking me, what are you writing? Like, what is this? And I said, oh, I'm writing to my friends. And I pointed up at the sky, and the writings were getting a little bit more and more intense and intricate. And my mother started looking at them, and she was amazed because I was actually writing a lot of Egyptian stuff when I was like 4 years old. And she was kind of like, what? Where did you see this? Like, where did it come from? I mean, but I always had this feeling of just kind of like how people, and certain people will say, like, I always just would say, like, I want to go home. Not that home is like, it is a place, but not like on planet Earth. You feel like you came from somewhere, and you just feel lost and confused. But I always would see them in the night sky. I always stayed up at night and saw them do crazy stuff. When I was 6, I heard this noise. I can't remember what kind of noise it was, but it woke me up, and I walked over to my mom's bedroom, and my mom's bedroom was completely just engulfed in this bright white light, and my mother was floating above her bed midair. And I was just kind of like, I wasn't scared. in shock, but I was just kind of like trying to make sense of it. Like, why is this happening? And then she just was dropped back on the bed and the lights were gone. And she was very scared and was in a panic. And, but I was asking her what happened and what was wrong. And she said, well, I'll tell you about it when you get older, which she ended up telling me when I got older. And then the first real encounter that I can recall and talk about with an ET or a being from a different dimension was when I was 7 years old. I passed away, and I was dead for a couple of minutes. And I remember the first thing that happened was being in this place, but the place, it doesn't have, there's no sense of time. There's no time. Time does not exist in general. That is my personal opinion too, but other people will argue. But there's no left and right, up and down. It's just bright white, and you just feel feelings of complete nirvana. I saw myself not in the physical body. I was a fuzzy speck of this light energy, like a ball of energy, and I was floating. And to my left, I could see other specks of light, and they were also floating. And I just immediately knew that those were other people, other souls. And I drifted off to the right. While they were all kind of going forward, I drifted to right, and I saw this being which looked like the typical ET. It was white though. It was bright white. I knew that he was around my age, maybe like it was young. And that's another thing, you just know things. There is no process of, you can't put these things into words really, but he was standing, but not really because there's nothing to stand on, but he was there, and huge black eyes, cat-like, like very kind of, slanted too, but black eyes that weren't hollow, black eyes that reflected the whole universe. They were beautiful. Very small pouty mouth, obviously, big round head, no hair, nothing like that, and it had long arms and long legs, and it just extended its hand, his arm, to me, and definitely, like, it was a lot of telepathy involved. I can't remember all of it.
A lot of people attribute the when they see that type of being, that it's a spacesuit, and it's not their actual physical being, but a suit that's being worn over top of their bodies to protect them.
For the aliens, that they wear the
right
suits? I in my personal experience and what I've seen and experienced, like, they can, but when you see them, like the one that I saw, it was definitely not like a suit of any kind, but does it have like a soul and an energy like we all do? Yes, but it kind of, I guess, materializes itself, so it's easily recognizable. But the message was, you have free will. I mean, you either can choose to move on to another lifetime, and learn something and go on a mission, or you can choose to return, and I chose to return.
So you saw all of these at a very young age.
Yes.
And then as you grew older, there were more experiences.
Oh yes, definitely. The ability, which my mother has as well, but just being quote unquote psychic or medium, or just spiritually divine, which all of us are spiritually divine.
And we'll find out more about that right back after this. Right back here on the show The Vessel with Gabriella Vaughn. And where we left off, Gabriella was talking a little bit about her past, like how she got into seeing beings from different places and where she's from, and how it's a little bit different than what we know today as extraterrestrials. Can you tell us now how they're manifesting themselves to you?
In many, many different ways. Now, especially that I've moved to a small town in Pennsylvania, there's definitely a lot of... it started off with my ears ringing. Like, one of my ears would ring. It was a very, very high-pitched sound, and it would throw off my equilibrium completely, and literally would get so high to a point where you're, like, deaf. And that started end of last year. And then when I moved to Johnstown, having a feeling, like, they literally, like, tell me, like, go outside. And I just go outside, and immediately when I look up anywhere in the sky, whether it's daytime, nighttime, most of the time they're more visible nighttime, it's right there. It'll be right there. And
let's talk a little bit more about Johnstown. Johnstown had a historical disaster.
Yeah, three times it happened. Yeah.
3 times it happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know much, but based on what I started to experience right away and the feeling I had as we were entering Johnstown, when I was moving, I had to, like, look up, like, what is about this place? Because there's so much, it's death. There's nothing but death. But
and misery. Yeah,
it's very stagnant energy. Do I think, and also have I seen them and felt them, and spirits of people that have passed away? Like, yeah. And sometimes it kind of gets confusing because you're like, is this like an alien? Like a being from not this planet that's communicating or doing things or saying things, or is this like an actual, like, spirit of a human that, used to live?
This town, the town of Johnstown, was met with horrific tragedies, and millions of people died.
3 floods.
In 3 different floods. And drowning is probably, in my opinion, the absolute worst way you could die and leave the planet.
Yeah. Fire for me, and definitely drowning, like polar opposites, like one extreme to the other. I think anything that's very slow, yeah, that's gonna be tough. But apparently too, there was a lot of Native Americans that, occupied the land, and then these floods happened, and there's thousands of bodies that haven't been even discovered yet. And when you look at the list of these people that are still missing, their bodies haven't been found. Most of them are like late 20s, early 30s, and then there's really, really young children. And it's just, I mean, if any place goes through that much history of just tragedy, it's going to have heaviness to it. But
right, and a lot of people say that